Hello and welcome. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. So glad that you could take a few minutes to join us today at Open Door. Today we're focusing and reflecting on the subject of rejoicing in the vision. Rejoicing in the vision. In other words, we're looking at a passage of scripture from Psalm 126, where the people of Israel had been through and were going through great difficulty. And it seems to me it was their vision and their hope and their faith that carried them through the adversity. And we'll talk a little bit about how having a bigger vision will help to carry us through the adversities that we face. So, reading from the 126th Psalm, New Revised Standard Version, it starts like this: When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses in the Negeb. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out with weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. So when was the psalm written and what was going on? The bulk of commentaries, in fact, all the commentaries that I looked at, speculate and believe that the first portion of the psalm was written as some of the people of Israel returned from 70 years of captivity in Babylon. Those have been, for those not familiar with the history of ancient Israel, ancient Israel had a brief golden period under King David and King Solomon, where they were an independent country. Then eventually they broke up, and finally they were conquered. And all those who were elite, who could be useful to the conquering Babylonians, were taken by force to live in exile, where they spent a long, long time. And for many of them, their dream was to be able to return home. One of the things that's interesting about this commentary and about the normal interpretation of this passage is that once the people actually came home, once the people in many ways got the restoration of their dream, and they were so happy about it at first, and they were so thrilled, and they were so excited, and they were celebrating. But then they make the long journey home, and when they get back home, they find that things were not nearly as they had envisioned them. All the walls were still laid in ruin, the city laid in ruin. All the beauty and the plenty and the abundance that they had hoped for and they dreamed for, it wasn't there. It wasn't there. Things were rough, and in many ways it was more uncomfortable to be where they were back home than for many of them to have been in captivity. At the time, they were living in perhaps one of the richest, greatest empires of the world, and all of these were people who were of significance. Again, it was the elites, those who could be deemed helpful to the empire that had been carried into captivity, and many of them lived very, very well. In fact, many did not come back from captivity. So the second part of the psalm is the people confronting the reality, the reality of being there. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses in the Negeb. That was a great desert. So may those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. One of the things that we see is that the people still continue to have a vision. The people still continue to have a vision. They continue to have a dream. The city laid in ruins. Many of their friends and family did not come back with them. They had finally gotten what they hoped for and prayed for. And the reality of what they hoped for and prayed for was so far removed from what they had envisioned and what they hoped. But many of the folks continued, and what carried them through this difficult time is that they continued to have a vision of what a full restoration would look like. What does a full restoration look like? And for them, it looked like being able to bear and sow and have a harvest. And it was this vision that caused them to continue on. They recognized that it was painful right now. They recognized that they were still sowing in tears right now. They recognized that they were still weeping right now. They recognized how hard this was emotionally and mentally and spiritually. But they still had the vision of what restoration would look like. And they never stopped working towards that vision. And it was the vision of completeness, the vision of restoration, that gave them hope, that fueled them, that empowered them, that energized them to do the work. Sometimes we can be like that. Sometimes we can get the things that we hope for and long for and pray for. Life can often be a journey in many ways. And so many times we come out of a rough situation, a bad situation, in many ways a hopeless situation. Whether it's folks who are returning from prison or a life of crime or have escaped from gangs, people who've been in unhealthy relationships or abusive relationships, can come out of those things. Sometimes we just come out of a period of times in our life where we just weren't happy and content. Maybe it's on the job or with our career or whatever it is that we're not finding satisfaction in. And we dream of a better time. We hope for a better time. And finally, we make the move. Circumstances align, the door is open, and we make the move. And we head toward that better life. And as we head toward the better life, we find that it's not nearly as easy as we hope for. The path is longer, the journey is longer. There's twists and turns, there's hardships that we did not foresee that take place. When we think about the people of Israel who have been freed from 400 years of captivity in Egypt, as they faced the wilderness, there were many, many of them that said, "Oh my goodness, why in the world did you bring me out into the wilderness to die? I could have stayed in Egypt. I was better off in Egypt. We had plenty to eat in Egypt. I didn't need to be out here in this wilderness." That is such a natural human tendency and trait that we have, that many times when we start working for change, we start working to make a difference, we start working to make a change in our communities, we encounter difficulties and hardships. When we start making a change in our families, when we start making a change in our individual lives, we often encounter difficulties that make us ask, what in the world? I could have just stayed where I was. I didn't need to go through all this. How am I better off now than I was then? I can only imagine that there were some of the people that have made their way all the way back to the homeland. Some of those people may have turned around and gone on back to captivity in Babylon and were never heard from again. They were never part of the biblical story again because they became Babylonian. That's a temptation that we are often faced with. It's a temptation that we often have, that we often have the temptation of going back because things have gotten so hard and because things have gotten so difficult. But here we see how they dealt with it. After they celebrated the success and they had the hardship, they understood that things were hard, that they were sowing in tears, and not just tears, that they were weeping. We can be honest about our feelings. We can be honest about the pain that we have. We can be honest about all of that. But ultimately, there's a greater vision that keeps us moving forward. There's a greater vision that keeps us moving forward. And we rejoice in that vision and we celebrate in that vision. That we rejoice at the thought of the reaping that we will have as we see justice, as we see life for the poor and the hungry. I grew up in originally I wasn't always a Mennonite. I grew up in a Black Baptist tradition, and many of the people that I grew up with, their families, my family, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, came from great adversity. But there was one thing that was passed down from generation to generation, is the idea of hope, the idea that God is still with us, the idea that we have not been abandoned or forsaken, but that God is with us. Even when the people of Israel were in captivity, they were told to thrive where they were, even though they were in captivity. And this was not the life that they wanted. It wasn't the life that they hoped for. It wasn't the life that they were aspiring to. It wasn't the life that they were going to settle for, because they were always aspiring for their freedom and for their restoration. Even while they were waiting for that, the scriptures told them to thrive where they were. And in many ways, the tradition that I came from really celebrated that. It thrived where it was. There was celebration, there was laughter, there was merriment, there was hope. There was still a vision that God would take us further, that God would restore us, that God would bring us back, that God would make things right and empower us to make things right. And it was this vision that allowed us to rejoice. It was this vision that kept us whole, that kept us moving forward. Yes, there might be some times that we weep, but then we dry our eyes and we dust ourselves off, get back up on our feet, and start sowing, start planting. And we could do that in joy, because we knew that ultimately there would be a great harvest. Brothers and sisters, siblings, I don't know what you're going through right now. Some of you may, hopefully, have already come into your harvest. Some of you may be in a place where we're still in captivity, haven't left Babylon yet. And some of us may be in this in-between place where we've come a long way from where we were. And we were happy about that. But yet we're confronted with a reality that's difficult and challenging and daunting and disheartening. Don't lose heart. Don't lose hope. Keep the vision that God has given you. Keep the vision that God has given us. Write it down even and make it plain, as the scriptures say. Hold on to that vision and rejoice in that vision, because it's that vision that gives us the strength to go out and do the work that we need to do to make it so. I truly believe that God calls us to participate in the work of, in the redeeming work and in the restorative work. We see it here, that God allowed the folks to come back out of captivity. But they still had to rebuild the walls. They still had to replant the vineyards. That they had to be full participants in the work of redemption and the work of restoration and the work of building back. God calls us to participate in that work. And in my experience and in the scriptural witness, the way that we are empowered and enabled to have the strength and the energy and the intensity and the focus and the determination that we need to do the work is by keeping the vision in front of us and rejoicing in that vision. Thinking about the time when we will have shouts of joy, reaping the harvest. It may be so. Peace be with you.